Hi, my name is Lyndsay Crowder, and my current events project is on the Shane Gillis controversy. So, the background information from this story is that Shane Gillis was hired as a new cast member for Saturday Night Live on NBC, along with two other comedians. Soon after his hiring, and before he actually started appearing on the show, his racist and homophobic comments made as recently as this year began to surface online, and this resulted in Gillis being fired from Saturday Night Live. And a lot of criticism has been taken by Saturday Night Live throughout the years because of their lack of diversity in their cast. So, with their newest cast member making racist comments, a lot of the fans of the show were outraged and started a conversation about controversial jokes in the comedy world. For this project, I used three sources. My wire service source was from the Associated Press, and the headline is SNL rescinds cast invitation to Gillis over YouTube video. The mainstream source that I used was from the Houston Chronicle, and the headline reads, "No one should be surprised that SNL gave Shane Gillis the boot." And finally, my out of mainstream source is from the National Review, and the headline reads, "Saturday Night Live fires Shane Gillis over Chinese jokes." So, to analyze my sources, I started with the leads. For the Associated Press story, the lead is a hard summary lead, and it is strictly factual. The lead simply states the facts of the story so that the writer is able to go into more detail throughout the rest of the story, and it is effective because it is able to give readers the black and white view of what is going on in the story without any opinion or bias. For the mainstream source, the Houston Chronicle, the lead in this article is more of a soft lead, and it was a scene setter lead. What I found interesting about this lead is that it also includes a question, which is very bold of the writer and makes the reader want to keep reading to find out what kind of line Gillis crossed and what got him fired from Saturday Night Live. And I thought that this lead was successful because it creates a bit of a mystery for the reader and makes them want to keep reading. From the National Review, this source also uses a soft lead, but it's more of a narrative lead because it tells the story of what happened to Shane Gillis in a short few sentences, and it gives the reader a good idea of what they're going to be reading about and with background information. And I thought that this lead was successful because it doesn't beat around the bush and it puts all of the information out there within the first paragraph. The next way that I analyzed these sources was through objectivity. So, through the Wire news source from the Associated Press, I noticed that the Associated Press is known for having very little to no bias, and I thought that this article reflected that well. There are no opinions or biases in this article, and the writer shows all sides of the controversy. For example, the sources that the writer used included Shane Gillis himself and a spokesperson from NBC. And I also found that the writer states the facts of the controversy without putting his own comments or statements about the topic into the story. For the Houston Chronicle, which was my mainstream source, I found that the article did not have much bias, and it does give both sides of the controversy and explains the differing opinions that people could have on the topic. So, for example, the writer uses examples of two interpretations of what cancel culture is, which is really important to his story, and that's kind of what he uses as the main focus for his article. Another way that Chen doesn't give into bias in this article is by giving examples of other comedians who have differing opinions or experiences with controversy concerning comedy. And lastly, I noticed that this article is more about the controversy of cancel culture rather than the controversy of Gillis versus Saturday Night Live. But instead of sharing his opinion, he shares all opinions of people who may be reading the article, which I thought was very interesting, and it allowed for anybody to read this article and understand what he was talking about. For my last source, the National Review, this article was based heavily on opinion. The National Review is a conservative news source, and while the article does have many parts that strictly state the news, there are a lot of comments that are leaning towards a conservative point of view. And given that the National Review is a conservative news source, it comes as no surprise that the writer of this article has sentiments that are from a conservative point of view and have bias that are leaning towards the right. And Kyle Smith, who was the writer of this article, did not use very many outside sources other than a spokesperson from NBC in his article, and most of the comments in this story were of his own. So next I will be looking at the overall similarities in the articles. So the first thing that I noticed was the accuracy. I thought that all of the articles included accurate information. None of the facts were conflicting, and although some of them had more opinions than others, the news part of the story were all correct and accurate. The next part that was similar was the sources. Most of the sources in the articles were actually the same. All three sources used a representative from NBC or Saturday Night Live, and most of them used Shane Gillis himself through his tweets or other statements that he gave to the public. And lastly, the other thing that was most similar in these stories was the visuals and multimedia. All three articles contained only one or two photos of Gillis. There were no videos or other multimedia, which could probably be due to the sensitive nature of the video of Gillis making the comments that caused the news in the first place. However, in the Houston Chronicle story, the video is hyperlinked within the story, so that gives the reader the option to watch the video at their own discretion. Next, I will be talking about the overall differences in the article. So the first difference that I noticed was in the brief and focus category. The AP article and the National Review articles are both brief and focused and get to the point of the story in a clear and concise way. However, the Houston Chronicle story is much longer and even required subheads to get through the story clearly. While I thought that the story was well written, it is much longer and drawn out than the other two articles that I used for this project, and it may cause some readers not to want to read something that long because it was a lot of drawn out information. The next thing that I found different in all of the articles were the angles that the writer took. In the Associated Press article, it was strictly factual, reporting the need-to-know information. In the Houston Chronicle story, it was more to show the impact of cancel culture and less about Shane Gillis versus NBC or Saturday Night Live, and it was mostly about what Shane Gillis' situation has to do with the cancel culture. And then finally, the National Review story is based on the opinions of the writer with a conservative point of view, and the story doesn't necessarily want the reader to change their mind about the situation, but more to show a different side of the controversy that hasn't been reported as much in the news. There aren't a lot of stories about this controversy that are from a conservative point of view. Finally, I will be sharing my overall opinion of all of the articles. So for the Associated Press article, I thought it was written well, and it was good to get the basic picture of what happened. The story was very brief, but it was focused on the most basic components of the story and was not confusing to read at all. I thought that the story was very fair and balanced and used sources from both sides to illustrate the controversy. For the Houston Chronicle story, I thought it was also very interesting and the writing was very well done. I will note that the story was not as concise as I think it could have been. Sometimes the writing kind of went all over the place, and that's why the story required subheads throughout. The article was the deepest out of all the articles that I read, and I felt that the writer took a lot of time and research to create this story, and there was little bias. The writer did a good job of keeping his own opinion out and showing all sides of the controversy. For the National Review story, this source was the hardest to read because it was based mostly on opinion. It was interesting, however, because this story came from a conservative source, and most of the articles written on this topic are not. The writer did not shy away from some of the more controversial points of the story, which I thought was good because it showed the controversy without hiding any parts that may offend a reader. So my overall opinion of all of the articles is that my favorite article was the Houston Chronicle because it heavily commented on the idea of cancel culture and where the Shane Gillis controversy fits into that. The writer had a great lead, and the rest of the story followed with interesting points that were not made in other articles that I have seen on this topic. So, overall, in conclusion, I really enjoyed looking through different articles on the same topic because it shows that journalists have the ability to take stories in different directions that interest different groups of people. I learned a lot about journalism through this project, and I enjoyed getting to see a lot of different news sources and a variety of different sources.